The sun rose over the dusty horizon of Willow Creek, Texas, in 1875, as Rebecca Palmer clutched her single weathered trunk and stared at the small frontier town that was to be her new home. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and sweat trickled down her back despite the early morning chill. She had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, responding to an advertisement for a mail-order bride that promised a comfortable life and respectable husband. Rebecca smoothed down her wrinkled blue traveling dress, purchased secondhand for this journey. At 22, with no prospects back east after her parents' deaths had left her penniless, this arrangement had seemed like her only option. Her correspondence with Jonathan Crawford had been promising. He owned a successful mercantile he'd written and needed a wife to help with the business and provide a proper household. The stagecoach driver set her trunk down with a thump. "This is it, miss, Willow Creek." He gave her a pitying look that made her stomach turn. "Good luck to you." Rebecca squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. "Thank you, sir. I'm sure I'll be just fine." She walked down the main street, the morning bustle already beginning. A group of women gathered outside the general store paused their conversation to stare at her. Rebecca approached them with what she hoped was a confident smile. "Good morning, ladies. I wonder if you might direct me to Mr. Jonathan Crawford's mercantile." The women exchanged glances, and the oldest of them, a plump woman in a fine blue bonnet, stepped forward. "Jonathan Crawford's store." She gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. "My dear, I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding." Rebecca's stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "Jonathan Crawford passed away 3 months ago, influenza. Half the town got sick, but he was one of the few who didn't recover." The world tilted beneath Rebecca's feet. "That can't be. I've been exchanging letters with him. The last one came just 2 weeks ago." A younger woman snorted. "That'd be his brother, Walter. Took over the store and apparently decided to take over Jonathan's mail-order bride arrangement too." She looked Rebecca up and down critically. "Though I can't imagine why. Walter's had his pick of local girls for years." The plump woman shushed her. "Now, Margaret, there's no need to be unkind." She turned to Rebecca with forced kindness. "The store is just down the street, dear, the large building with the green door." Rebecca thanked them mechanically and moved away, her legs wooden beneath her. Dead. Jonathan Crawford was dead, and she'd been corresponding with his brother without knowing it. The shock of it left her numb as she approached the green door with Crawford's mercantile painted in gold letters above it. She pushed the door open, a small bell announcing her arrival. A few customers browsed the shelves, and behind the counter stood a thin, wiry man with spectacles and a receding hairline, nothing like the robust, handsome man described in the letters. He looked up at her entrance, his expression falling into one of dismay. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew exactly who she was. "Mr. Crawford, Mr. Walter Crawford." Rebecca's voice sounded distant to her own ears. The man sighed heavily. "Yes, that's me, and you must be Miss Palmer." "Rebecca," she confirmed. "I've come as arranged in our correspondence." She chose her words carefully, aware of the customers listening with undisguised interest. Walter Crawford's face flushed. "Yes, well, about that, perhaps we should speak privately." He gestured to a door behind the counter. "My office is this way." The office was small and cramped, with ledgers piled on every surface. Walter closed the door and turned to her, not offering her a seat. "Miss Palmer, I'm afraid there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "Your brother is dead," Rebecca stated flatly. "The ladies outside informed me." Walter nodded, relief washing over his face that he wouldn't have to explain that part. "Yes, Jonathan passed away 3 months ago. I've been handling his affairs, including continuing correspondence with me under his name." Walter had the grace to look ashamed. "I didn't know how to tell you in a letter. I thought I might still honor his arrangement." Something in his tone made Rebecca's skin crawl. "But now you've changed your mind." "It's just that." Walter removed his spectacles and wiped them nervously. "Jonathan was establishing himself, building a future. I'm barely keeping the store afloat. I can't take on a wife right now, especially." He trailed off, his eyes darting away from her face. "Especially what, Mr. Crawford?" He replaced his spectacles. Jonathan had certain expectations. He described someone different. Rebecca understood immediately. Jonathan had wanted someone prettier, younger perhaps, someone who matched the photograph Rebecca had sent taken 5 years ago before grief and hardship had etched themselves into her face. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I see," she said coldly. "You've brought me halfway across the country on false pretenses, and now you're rejecting me because I don't meet your brother's standards of beauty." "It's not just that," Walter protested weakly. "The store is struggling. I can barely support myself, let alone a wife." "Then you should have informed me before I spent my last dollars on this journey." Rebecca fought to keep her voice steady. "What am I to do now, Mr. Crawford?" Walter shifted uncomfortably. "There's a boarding house run by Widow Jenkins at the end of the street. I can advance you a week's lodging while you consider your options." "My options?" Rebecca repeated incredulously. "What options does an unmarried woman with no money have in a town where she knows no one?" The bell in the store jingled, signaling another customer, and Walter looked relieved at the interruption. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Palmer. I'll arrange things with Mrs. Jenkins and send your trunk over. Excuse me." He slipped out of the office, leaving Rebecca alone with her shock and humiliation. She remained there for several minutes, trying to gather her thoughts. Her entire future had just collapsed. She had no money to return east, no family to take her in, and now no prospective husband. Her options, as Walter had delicately put it, were grim indeed. When she finally emerged from the office, the store had filled with curious townspeople, all pretending to shop while stealing glances at her. Walter was behind the counter, speaking to a tall man whose back was to Rebecca. As she approached, she overheard their conversation. "Another mail-order bride disaster," Walter was saying. "This one came for Jonathan, if you can believe it. I couldn't tell her in a letter he'd passed." The tall man's posture stiffened. "So you let her come all this way instead?" "What was I supposed to do, Ben? Besides, look at her." Jonathan would have sent her straight back, not exactly what his advertisement asked for. Rebecca cleared her throat loudly. Both men turned to face her, Walter looking mortified at being overheard. The tall man, Ben, studied her with startling blue eyes set in a weathered, sun-darkened face. Unlike Walter's city clothes, this man wore dusty work clothes, a bandana around his neck, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head. A cowboy by the look of him. "Mr. Crawford," Rebecca said, her voice icy, "I believe we've concluded our business. If you'll direct me to Mrs. Jenkins' boarding house, I'll trouble you no further." Walter stammered an apology, but Ben spoke over him, his deep voice carrying in the now silent store. "Walter, you're a damned fool." Walter blinked in surprise. "Pardon me," Ben turned back to the storekeeper. "This lady traveled all the way from— Where are you from, madam?" "Boston," Rebecca replied, startled by the interruption. "Boston," Ben continued. "All that way based on your lies, and now you're tossing her aside like unwanted goods." He shook his head in disgust. One of the women who'd been browsing nearby snickered. "Unwanted is right. Poor thing came all this way for nothing. No husband, no prospects, and not much to recommend her." Rebecca felt as if she'd been slapped. The woman's comment, spoken loudly enough for everyone to hear, brought titters from the other customers. She fought the urge to flee, forcing herself to stand tall despite the burning in her cheeks. Ben's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the room, then landed back on Rebecca. Something in his expression changed, a determination settling over his features. "She's wanted by me," he stated, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent store. Rebecca stared at him in shock. "Excuse me." Ben removed his hat and held it against his chest, revealing a thick crop of brown hair. "Miss Palmer, is it?" When she nodded mutely, he continued, "Ben Blackburn, madam. I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. I've been considering advertising for a wife myself, but it seems Providence has saved me the trouble." Walter gaped at him. "Ben, you can't be serious. You don't even know her." "I know she had the courage to travel across the country to start a new life. I know she's been treated shamefully since arriving." Ben's eyes never left Rebecca's face. "And I know a good woman when I see one." Rebecca found her voice. Mr. Blackburn, while I appreciate your gallantry, I cannot accept such an offer from a complete stranger. Ben nodded as if he'd expected this response. Of course not, madam. I'm simply proposing an arrangement. I need help at my ranch cooking, keeping house. The work is hard but honest. In exchange, I offer room, board, and a fair wage, no strings attached. He paused. And if, after getting to know each other, we find we suit, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement. The murmurs in the store grew louder. Rebecca knew what they were thinking, that she was desperate enough to accept any offer, that this rough cowboy was doing her a charity. Part of her wanted to refuse out of pride alone, but the practical part of her recognized an opportunity when it appeared. "And if we don't suit," she asked cautiously, "then I'll pay your fare to wherever you wish to go next, with references for your work." Ben's directness was refreshing after Walter's evasions. "I give you my word as a gentleman." Rebecca considered her options. A position as housekeeper with the possibility of something more versus a week at a boarding house before her money ran out completely. When viewed that way, the choice wasn't difficult at all. "Very well, Mr. Blackburn, I accept your offer on a trial basis." Ben's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, softening the hard lines and bringing warmth to his blue eyes. "Excellent. I'll arrange for transportation." He turned to Walter. "I'll take Miss Palmer's trunk in my wagon, and Walter, you owe this lady a refund for her trouble." Walter sputtered, but under Ben's steady gaze, he opened the cash register and counted out several bills, handing them to Rebecca with mumbled apologies. She took the money with as much dignity as she could muster. Aware that every eye in the store was watching their exchange, Ben offered her his arm. "Shall we, Miss Palmer? I need to collect a few supplies before we head back to the ranch." Rebecca placed her hand lightly on his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn." As they moved through the store, Ben quietly pointed out items on the shelves. "Do you need anything while we're here? Soap, hairpins, writing paper." "It's a fair ride to town, so best to stock up." His consideration touched her. "Some writing paper and a pot of ink, if you please, and perhaps some soap." Ben nodded and collected the items, adding them to his own purchases. As they approached the counter to pay, the woman who had made the cruel comment earlier stood directly in their path. My, Ben Blackburn, I never thought I'd see the day you'd taken astray." Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "How charitable of you." Ben's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "Mrs. Hollister, I don't recall asking for your opinion." "I'm just looking out for you, Ben. Everyone knows you need a wife, but surely you can do better than a woman with the courage to start fresh in a strange place," Ben interrupted. "Then someone willing to work hard for what she wants." "I disagree, Mrs. Hollister. Now, if you'll excuse us." He guided Rebecca around the woman, whose face had flushed an unattractive red. Rebecca kept her head high, though her heart pounded painfully. No one had ever defended her like that before. They paid for their purchases and left the store, stepping into the bright sunlight. Rebecca took a deep breath, trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. "I apologize for the town's welcome, Miss Palmer," Ben said quietly as they walked toward a wagon hitched at the end of the street. "Willow Creek has its share of gossips and hard hearts, but there are good people here too." "You seem to be one of them, Mr. Blackburn," Rebecca replied. "I don't know how to thank you for your intervention." Ben helped her up to the wagon seat. "No thanks necessary. I meant what I said inside. I've been considering a mail-order bride myself. My ranch is doing well, but it's a lonely life." He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "This way, we both get a chance to see if we might suit without the pressure of immediate marriage." As they collected her trunk from outside the mercantile and loaded it into the wagon, Rebecca felt the stares of townspeople following their progress. What had she gotten herself into? She knew nothing about this man except that he seemed kind and had a ranch. She'd escaped one precarious situation only to enter another. But as Ben Blackburn clicked to the horses and the wagon rolled out of town, Rebecca couldn't help feeling a small spark of hope. Whatever awaited her at his ranch, it had to be better than the humiliation she'd just endured. And perhaps, just perhaps, this unexpected turn of events would lead to something good. The journey to Ben's ranch took just over an hour, giving Rebecca time to observe both the landscape and the man beside her. The Texas hill country rolled out in waves of green and gold, dotted with stands of oak and pecan trees. After the crowded streets of Boston, the openness of it all was both exhilarating and intimidating. Ben Blackburn was not much for idle chatter, she discovered. He answered her questions about the area readily enough, but didn't feel the need to fill every silence. There was something reassuring about his quiet confidence, a steadiness that contrasted sharply with Walter Crawford's nervous dissembling. "How long have you had your ranch, Mr. Blackburn?" Rebecca asked as they crossed a shallow creek, going on 5 years now. "Started with 30 acres and a run-down cabin. Now I've got 300 acres and a proper house." There was justifiable pride in his voice. "Built most of it myself." "That's impressive," Rebecca said sincerely. "What do you raise?" "Cattle mostly, but I keep some horses too." "Good breeding stock," he glanced at her. "Do you ride, Miss Palmer?" Rebecca shook her head. "I never had the opportunity in Boston. We lived in the city, and after my parents died, I worked as a seamstress. There wasn't much call for riding skills." "You're a seamstress." Ben looked pleasantly surprised. "That's a useful skill out here. Store-bought clothes are expensive, and most folks make do with homemade." "I'm quite proficient," Rebecca said, pleased to have something valuable to offer. "I can sew anything from everyday work clothes to fine dresses." "That'll serve you well." Ben pointed ahead to where the land began to rise. "We're coming up on my property now. The house is just over that rise." As they crested the hill, Rebecca caught her first glimpse of what was to be her new home, at least temporarily. The house was larger than she'd expected, a 2-story structure of timber and native stone with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures. "It's lovely," she said, genuinely impressed. Ben looked pleased. "It's not fancy, but it's solid. I added the 2nd story last year." He guided the wagon toward the house. "I've got 2 hands who help with the ranch work, Miguel and his son Tomás. They live in the smaller cabin beyond the barn. Good men, both of them." As they pulled up to the house, the front door opened, and an elderly woman stepped onto the porch. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a practical dark dress with an apron tied around her ample middle. "That's Mrs. Hathaway," Ben explained as he set the brake on the wagon. "She comes in 3 days a week to help with cooking and cleaning. She lives in town with her daughter." Ben jumped down and came around to help Rebecca from the wagon. As her feet touched the ground, she smoothed her travel-worn dress, suddenly conscious of her appearance after the long journey. "Mrs. Hathaway," Ben called, "we have a visitor who will be staying with us. This is Miss Rebecca Palmer from Boston." The older woman's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Is that so?" She looked Rebecca up and down with undisguised curiosity. "Well, come in then, miss. You look like you could use a wash and a hot meal." Rebecca followed them into the house, taking in her surroundings with interest. The interior was simple but surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a large stone fireplace at one end and a solid oak table at the other. The furniture was sturdy and well-made, if not fashionable, and everything was remarkably clean for a bachelor's home. "Mrs. Hathaway keeps things in order," Ben explained, noticing her appraisal, "though she's been telling me for years that the place needs a woman's touch." "And it does," the older woman confirmed tartly. She turned to Rebecca. "Where shall I put the young lady, Mr. Blackburn?" "Not that there's many options." Ben looked momentarily discomfited. "The spare bedroom upstairs should be made up. It was meant for my sister when she visits, though she hasn't been out since Christmas." "I'll show you up, Miss Palmer," Mrs. Hathaway said. "Mr. Blackburn, I expect you'll want to bring in her trunk." While Ben went to retrieve her belongings, Mrs. Hathaway led Rebecca up a narrow staircase to the 2nd floor. "So," the older woman said when they were alone, "how exactly did you come to be traveling home with Ben Blackburn?" "He's not mentioned courting anyone, let alone a lady from back east." Rebecca hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's rather complicated, Mrs. Hathaway. I came to Willow Creek as a mail-order bride, but my intended had passed away without my knowledge. Mrs. Hathaway clicked her tongue. Jonathan Crawford, I'll wager, that explains it. His brother Walter isn't worth the ground he walks on. She opened a door at the end of the hallway. Here we are, it's simple but clean. The room was indeed simple, a narrow bed with an iron frame, a chest of drawers, a small writing desk beneath the window, and a washstand with a basin and pitcher. But the linens looked fresh, and the window offered a lovely view of the rolling pastures. It's perfect, thank you, Rebecca said sincerely. Mrs. Hathaway lingered in the doorway. And how exactly did you end up with Mr. Blackburn? Rebecca's cheeks warmed at the memory. He overheard my predicament at the mercantile and offered me a position as his housekeeper. She lifted her chin slightly. It's a trial arrangement with no obligations on either side. Mrs. Hathaway said noncommittally. Well, I suppose that explains why he sent word to town this morning that my services wouldn't be needed after this week. Rebecca's eyes widened. He did. But we only just met today. Ben Blackburn has always known his own mind, Mrs. Hathaway replied. Don't fret, child. I've been hoping to retire for years. My daughter's been after me to mind her little ones instead of tramping out here 3 times a week. She softened her expression. He's a good man, Miss Palmer. Hard-working, honest to a fault, and kind when it counts. You could do worse. Rebecca didn't know how to respond to that, but she was saved by Ben's arrival with her trunk. He set it down at the foot of the bed, then straightened, looking slightly out of place in the small bedroom. I hope this will suit you, Miss Palmer, he said. It's not what you're used to, I'm sure, but it's lovely, Rebecca interrupted. Far better than I expected, truly. Ben looked relieved. Good, I'll let you get settled then. Mrs. Hathaway has supper nearly ready. Come down when you're ready, he hesitated. And Miss Palmer, I meant what I said about this being a trial arrangement. There are no expectations beyond your work as housekeeper. After he left, Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. From hopeful bride to unwanted burden to employed housekeeper in the span of hours, it was almost too much to process. Mrs. Hathaway bustled about, pouring fresh water into the basin. I'll bring up hot water for a proper bath after supper. For now, this should help you freshen up. She patted Rebecca's shoulder awkwardly. Don't look so troubled, dear. Things have a way of working out. When the older woman left, Rebecca allowed herself a moment of quiet tears, not of despair, but of relief and lingering humiliation. She hadn't been what Jonathan Crawford wanted. She wasn't pretty enough, young enough, whatever enough that would have made her acceptable. The sting of that rejection, even from a dead man, cut deep, but Ben Blackburn had seen her differently. She wasn't foolish enough to think his offer was based on attraction. He needed a housekeeper, and she needed employment. It was a practical arrangement for both of them. Still, his kindness in the face of the town's cruelty had touched something inside her. Rebecca washed her face and hands, changed into her one other dress, a simple brown day dress that had seen better days, and pinned her hair neatly. Whatever the future held, she would face it with dignity and determination. She had survived loss and hardship before. She would weather this unexpected turn too. When she descended the stairs, Ben was waiting at the bottom, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. He offered her a tentative smile. Feel better? The road dust gets into everything out here. Much better, thank you, Rebecca replied. Your home is very comfortable, Mr. Blackburn. Just Ben, please. He led her to the dining table where Mrs. Hathaway was setting out dishes of roasted chicken, potatoes, and green beans. No need for formality if we're to be living under the same roof, Rebecca nodded. Then you must call me Rebecca. Supper was a quiet affair. Mrs. Hathaway ate with them, keeping the conversation flowing with local gossip and gentle inquiries about Rebecca's journey west. Ben contributed occasionally, but seemed content to listen and observe. Rebecca caught him watching her several times, his expression thoughtful. After the meal, Mrs. Hathaway insisted on clearing up while Ben showed Rebecca around the rest of the house. The tour didn't take long besides the main room and kitchen downstairs. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs and a small study off the main room that Ben used for his ranch accounts. It's not much compared to city houses, Ben said as they returned to the main room, but it suits my needs." "It's a fine home," Rebecca assured him. "You should be proud of what you've built here." Ben studied her face as if trying to determine her sincerity. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the ranch," he said. "And we can discuss your duties more specifically. For tonight, you should rest. It's been a long day for you." Rebecca couldn't argue with that. The emotional turmoil and physical exhaustion of the day were catching up with her after thanking Mrs. Hathaway for the promised bath water. She retired to her room, where she soaked away the grime of travel and changed into her nightgown. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the night sounds of crickets and distant cattle, Rebecca reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. She had come to Texas expecting to be a merchant's wife, helping to run a store and build a respectable life. Instead, she was a cowboy's housekeeper with an uncertain future. Yet despite everything, she felt an unexpected sense of peace. Perhaps it was the honest simplicity of Ben Blackburn or the solid comfort of the house he'd built with his own hands. Whatever the reason, for the first time since leaving Boston, Rebecca felt like she might have found a place where she belonged. The next morning, Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from below. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back and she sat up, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She dressed quickly in her blue traveling dress, which Mrs. Hathaway had kindly brushed clean and hung by the window to air overnight. After arranging her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, Rebecca made her way downstairs. Ben was already at the table, a cup of coffee in one hand and a ledger open before him. He looked up at her approach, and something in his expression, a mix of surprise and appreciation, made her cheeks warm. "Good morning," he said, rising from his chair. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Rebecca replied. "The country air is quite invigorating." Mrs. Hathaway emerged from the kitchen with a plate of bacon, eggs, and biscuits. "Sit yourself down, Miss Palmer. Can't start the day without a proper breakfast, especially out here." The food was simple but delicious, and Rebecca realized how hungry she was. They ate in companionable silence, broken occasionally by Ben mentioning his plans for the day or Mrs. Hathaway commenting on household matters. After breakfast, Mrs. Hathaway took Rebecca aside to explain the workings of the house where supplies were kept, how Ben liked his laundry done, which day was best for baking bread. "He's particular about some things," the older woman confided, "but not unreasonably so. Likes his coffee strong, his shirt starched just so, and can't abide clutter on his desk in the study. Otherwise, he's easy enough to please." Rebecca listened carefully, committing everything to memory. If she was to be successful in this position, she needed to understand Ben's preferences and habits. "Does he entertain often?" she asked, thinking of her duties should guests arrive. Mrs. Hathaway laughed. "Lord, no, Ben's not one for socializing. The occasional neighbor might stop by on business, and his sister visits at Christmas, but that's about it." She lowered her voice. "Truth be told, he's something of a loner. Folks in town respect him. He's fair in his dealings and generous when someone's in need, but he keeps to himself mostly." Before Rebecca could inquire further, Ben appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "If you're ready, Rebecca, I'd like to show you around the property." She followed him outside, where the morning sun was already warming the air. The ranch looked even more impressive by daylight, neat fences, well-maintained buildings, and in the distance, healthy cattle grazing on lush grass. "You've built something wonderful here," Rebecca said as they walked toward the barn. Ben ducked his head at the compliment. "It's been a lot of work. When I bought this land, most folks thought I was a fool. It was overgrazed and neglected, the house barely standing, but I saw what it could be." Inside the barn, Ben introduced her to Miguel and Tomás, who were preparing to ride out to check on a new calf. Both men nodded respectfully to Rebecca, though she noticed their curious glances. "Miguel's been with me since the beginning," Ben explained as they moved through the barn. "Best horseman I've ever known, and Tomás is following in his footsteps. They're the only permanent hands I keep. During roundup, I hire extra men." The The barn housed several horses, including a beautiful black stallion that Ben introduced as Midnight. "My prize breeding stallion," he said with evident pride. "His foals fetch top dollar throughout the territory." "He's magnificent," Rebecca said, admiring the glossy coat and powerful muscles of the animal. Ben smiled, the most genuine smile she'd seen from him yet. "He knows it too, vainest creature on the ranch." As they continued their tour, Ben explained the workings of the ranch, the rotation of the cattle through different pastures to prevent overgrazing, the careful breeding program he'd established, the improvements he planned for the coming year. Rebecca listened with genuine interest, impressed by his knowledge and planning. "It sounds like you've thought of everything," she commented as they walked back toward the house. "Not everything," Ben admitted. "I've been so focused on building the ranch that I've neglected other things. The house needs attention: curtains, proper furniture for the parlor, all those touches that make a house a home." He glanced at her. "That's partly why I needed help. Mrs. Hathaway does her best, but she's getting on in years and there's only so much she can manage." Rebecca nodded her understanding. "I'd be happy to help with those things. I'm quite good at sewing, as I mentioned, and I have some experience with household management from helping my mother before she passed." "I'd appreciate that," Ben said. "And if there's anything you need to make your work easier or your stay more comfortable, just let me know." They had reached the porch and Ben paused, his expression turning serious. "Rebecca, I want to make something clear. While you're here, this is your home too. I know our arrangement is unusual, but I want you to feel welcome and safe. My word as a gentleman still stands. If at any point this doesn't suit you, just say so." His earnestness touched her. "Thank you, Ben. I appreciate your candor and your kindness." He nodded, seeming satisfied with her response. "I need to ride out with Miguel and Tomás for a few hours. Will you be all right here with Mrs. Hathaway?" Rebecca assured him she would be fine, and he departed, leaving her to return to the house and begin familiarizing herself with what would now be her domain. The next few days fell into a pattern as Rebecca settled into life at the Blackburn Ranch. Mrs. Hathaway stayed on through the week, showing Rebecca the rhythm of the household, when to start bread rising for the day's meals, how to manage the washing with the limited water they hauled from the well, which herbs in the kitchen garden were ready for harvesting. Ben was often out from dawn until dusk, working alongside his hands to move cattle, repair fences, and attend to the 1,000 tasks that kept the ranch running. He returned in the evenings tired but satisfied, taking his meals with Rebecca and sometimes sitting with her afterward, discussing the day's events or sharing stories of his early years in Texas. Rebecca found herself enjoying these quiet evenings more than she would have expected. Ben was not a great talker, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and often surprisingly perceptive. He asked about her life in Boston, listening intently to her descriptions of the crowded streets and busy harbor, the changing fashions and cultural events she'd occasionally been able to attend. "It sounds like another world," he commented one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Do you miss it?" Rebecca considered the question honestly. "I miss certain things: libraries and bookshops, concerts in the park, the convenience of having stores nearby. But I don't miss the noise or the dirt or feeling like just another face in the crowd." She looked out at the expansive landscape. "There's a freedom here that I never experienced in the city." Ben nodded as if he understood perfectly. "That's what drew me west, the space to breathe, to build something of my own without someone looking over my shoulder telling me how it should be done. By the end of the week, Mrs. Hathaway pronounced Rebecca ready to take over the household duties on her own. "You're a quick study," the older woman approved, "and you've got a natural feel for managing a home. Ben's lucky to have found you." On Mrs. Hathaway's last day, Rebecca was surprised when the woman pressed a small packet into her hands. "Patterns," she explained, "for men's shirts and work clothes. Thought they might be useful, what with you being a seamstress and all." Rebecca thanked her warmly, touched by the thoughtful gift. As Ben drove Mrs. Hathaway back to town in the wagon, Rebecca set about planning improvements to the house. The main room could use curtains to soften the bare windows, and the kitchen would benefit from better organization. She made lists and measurements, already imagining how she could make the space more comfortable. When Ben returned that evening, he brought with him a large parcel. "I stopped by the mercantile," he explained, setting it on the table. "Thought you might need some materials to start on those household touches we discussed." Rebecca unwrapped the parcel to find several yards of sturdy cotton fabric in a cheerful blue, along with thread, buttons, and other notions. "This is perfect," she said, genuinely pleased. "I can make curtains for the main room and perhaps some cushions for the chairs." "Whatever you think best," Ben said, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Walter Crawford asked after you, by the way." Rebecca stiffened at the name. "Did he? I can't imagine why. Curiosity, mostly." "The whole town's talking about you coming to work for me." Ben's mouth twisted in a sardonic smile. "According to Walter, Mrs. Hollister has been spreading rumors that would make a saloon girl blush." "I see," Rebecca said, her voice tight. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised." Ben's expression softened. "Does it bother you, what people in town might think?" Rebecca considered the question. "It would be nice to be judged fairly on my own merits rather than through the lens of gossip, but I've learned that what others think matters less than what I know to be true." She met his gaze steadily. "And the truth is that you offered me honest employment when I needed it most. There's no shame in that." Ben studied her for a long moment, something like admiration in his eyes. "No, there isn't," he agreed softly. "Though I'm sorry if my offer has caused you additional difficulty." "It hasn't," Rebecca assured him. "Quite the opposite." That night as she prepared for bed, Rebecca reflected on how quickly her circumstances had changed. In just a week, she'd gone from a desperate mail-order bride to a woman with purpose and direction. The work was harder than anything she'd done in Boston, but there was satisfaction in it too, and Ben was not what she'd expected. Not the rough, uncouth cowboy she might have imagined, nor the calculated businessman that Jonathan Crawford had presented himself as in his letters. Ben Blackburn was thoughtful and fair, hardworking and modest about his accomplishments. She found herself watching him when he wasn't aware, noticing the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentle way he handled even the most spirited of his horses. It was dangerous thinking, she knew. Their arrangement was professional, not romantic. But in the quiet of her room, Rebecca admitted to herself that she was beginning to care for the quiet cowboy who had rescued her from humiliation and given her a chance at a new life. The following weeks brought a rhythm to Rebecca's days that she found deeply satisfying. She rose early to prepare breakfast before Ben and his hands departed for their day's work. Mornings were for bread making and laundry, afternoons for mending and household projects. By the time Ben returned in the evening, a hot meal was waiting, the house was tidy, and Rebecca had usually accomplished at least one improvement to their living space. She began with the curtains, using the blue fabric Ben had purchased to create simple but attractive window coverings for the main room. Next came cushions for the wooden chairs, stuffed with spare wool from the spring shearing. She discovered an old quilt in a trunk in the attic, faded but still serviceable, which she cleaned and repaired to drape over the back of Ben's favorite chair. Each addition transformed the house a little more, making it feel less like a bachelor's functional shelter and more like a home. Ben noticed and commented on each change, his quiet approval spurring Rebecca to further efforts. One afternoon, as she was working on a shirt for Ben, his work clothes needed constant mending, she discovered Tamaz appeared at the door with a bundle of wildflowers. "For you, Miss Rebecca," the young man said shyly. "Papa and I found them by the creek, thought they might brighten the house." Rebecca was touched by the gesture. "They're beautiful, Tamaz, thank you." She arranged them in a mason jar on the dining table, where their bright colors immediately brought life to the room. When Ben returned that evening, his gaze went immediately to the flowers. "Those are new," he commented as he washed up for supper. "A gift from Tamaz," Rebecca explained, serving the stew she'd prepared. Wasn't that thoughtful? Ben's expression was unreadable as he studied the colorful arrangement. Very thoughtful, he agreed after a moment. Tamaz is a good boy. There was something in his tone that made Rebecca look at him more closely. Was that jealousy? Surely not. Ben had made it clear their arrangement was professional. Yet she couldn't deny the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze lingered on the flowers as if they represented something more significant than a kind gesture. The next day, Ben returned earlier than usual, a small package tucked under his arm. "I was checking the north pasture and found these," he said, unwrapping a bundle of unusually large, perfect pecans. "Thought they might be good for baking." It was such a transparent attempt to match Tamaz's gesture that Rebecca had to bite back a smile. "How thoughtful of you," she said, accepting the nuts. "I could make a pie for Sunday dinner if you'd like." Ben's face brightened. "I'd like that very much." That Sunday, Rebecca outdid herself with the meal: roasted chicken with herbs from the garden, fresh bread still warm from the oven, vegetables she'd preserved from the kitchen garden, and the promised pecan pie. She set the table with extra care, using the good dishes that normally stayed in the cupboard, and added a sprig of late-blooming wildflowers beside each plate. Miguel and Tamaz joined them, as they often did for Sunday dinner, and the conversation flowed easily among the four of them. Rebecca had come to appreciate the two Mexican men: Miguel with his quiet dignity and vast knowledge of horses, Tamaz with his eager questions about the world beyond the ranch. As they finished the pie, which Ben declared was the best he'd ever tasted, Tamaz turned to Rebecca with curiosity in his eyes. "Miss Rebecca, how did you come to be here? Mr. Blackburn never mentioned he was sending for a housekeeper." An awkward silence fell over the table. Rebecca glanced at Ben, unsure how much he wanted revealed about the circumstances of her arrival. Ben cleared his throat. "Miss Palmer came to Willow Creek for other reasons, Tamaz. When those plans didn't work out, I was fortunate enough to secure her services for the ranch." Miguel, more perceptive than his son, changed the subject smoothly, asking Ben about his plans for the fall cattle drive. Rebecca sent him a grateful look, which the older man acknowledged with a slight nod. After Miguel and Tamaz departed to their cabin, Rebecca began clearing the table. Ben helped, carrying dishes to the wash basin in unusual silence. "I'm sorry about Tamaz's question," he said finally as Rebecca pumped water for washing. "It wasn't his fault. I never explained to them how you came to be here." "There's no need to apologize," Rebecca assured him. "It was a natural question, and your answer was perfectly adequate." Ben leaned against the counter, watching her work. "It didn't feel adequate. It made it sound as if I simply took advantage of your misfortune for my own convenience." Rebecca looked up from the dishes, surprised by his concern. "Isn't that what happened? My plans fell through and you needed a housekeeper. It was mutually beneficial." "Is that how you see it?" Ben's voice was quiet, his eyes searching her face. Rebecca felt a flutter of uncertainty. "How else should I see it?" Ben stepped closer, taking the dishcloth from her hands. "Rebecca, when I saw you standing in that store, being judged and found wanting by people who knew nothing about you, I wasn't thinking about convenience or housekeeping. I was thinking that Walter Crawford and the rest of them were fools who couldn't recognize the treasure standing right in front of them." Rebecca's breath caught. "Ben, I know our arrangement was presented as professional," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "And I meant what I said about there being no expectations beyond your work here. But I'd be lying if I said I hadn't hoped for more, even from that first day." The confession hung between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Rebecca's heart pounded as she searched for the right words. "I came to Texas to marry a stranger," she said carefully. "A man who turned out to be nothing like his letters suggested. In fact, he wasn't even alive to meet me." She shook her head at the absurdity of it. "Instead, I found myself standing in a mercantile, being mocked for being unwanted, until a cowboy I'd never met spoke up for me." Ben winced slightly at the memory. "Those women had no right." "No, they didn't," Rebecca agreed. "But in a strange way, I'm grateful it happened that way. Because it brought me here, to this ranch, to this life." She met his gaze directly. "To you, Ben's eyes widened slightly. "Rebecca, are you saying?" "I'm saying that what began as a practical arrangement has become something more to me as well." Her cheeks warmed at the admission. "I've come to care for you, Ben, more than I thought possible in such a short time." The smile that spread across Ben's face was like sunrise breaking over the hills, slow at first, then brilliant and transformative. He reached for her hands, taking them gently in his. "I never expected to find someone like you," he said softly. "When my sister suggested I advertise for a mail-order bride, I laughed it off. What would a city woman want with a rough cowboy and his isolated ranch? But then there you were, standing in Crawford's store with your head held high despite everything, and I knew." "Knew what?" Rebecca asked when he paused. "That you were the one I'd been waiting for, without even realizing I was waiting." Ben's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I didn't want to pressure you. You'd already been through enough disappointment." "You could never be a disappointment, Ben Blackburn," Rebecca said firmly. Ben's eyes darkened with emotion. "May I kiss you, Rebecca Palmer?" In answer, Rebecca stepped closer, tilting her face up to his. Ben's arms encircled her waist as he lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened as she responded. His lips were warm and sure against hers, his embrace strong yet tender. When they finally parted, Rebecca felt as if something fundamental had shifted within her, as if pieces of her life that had been adrift had finally found their proper place. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I met you," Ben confessed, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm glad you finally did," Rebecca replied, a smile curving her lips. That evening marked a turning point in their relationship. Though Rebecca maintained her role as housekeeper, there was a new understanding between them, an acknowledgement of deeper feelings growing day by day. Ben began finding reasons to return to the house during the day: a forgotten tool, a message for Miguel, a sudden need for coffee. Each visit brought a stolen moment together, a brief conversation, sometimes just a look exchanged across the yard that sent warmth flooding through Rebecca's body. In the evenings, they lingered longer after supper, sometimes reading together by lamplight, sometimes just talking about their hopes and plans. Ben spoke of his dreams for the ranch, the improvements he wanted to make, the legacy he hoped to build. Rebecca shared memories of her parents, her life in Boston, and her own tentative hopes for the future. One evening in early October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ben took her hand in his. "There's a harvest dance in town next weekend," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Would you like to go with me?" Rebecca hesitated. She hadn't returned to town since that first day, and the prospect of facing the gossips and curious stares was daunting. Yet the thought of attending the dance on Ben's arm, of publicly acknowledging what was growing between them, held a certain appeal. "I'd like that," she said finally, "though I'm not sure what kind of welcome we'll receive." Ben squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Anyone who can't see what a remarkable woman you are isn't worth our concern." The week leading up to the dance was filled with preparation. Rebecca took one of her better dresses, a deep green merino wool that had seen better days, and refashioned it using some of the fabric Ben had purchased. The result was a stylish gown that highlighted her slender figure and brought out the rich auburn tones in her hair. Ben, too, made an effort, polishing his best boots and asking Rebecca to press his good shirt and jacket. On the morning of the dance, he even submitted to a trim of his hair and beard, sitting patiently in a kitchen chair while Rebecca wielded the scissors with careful precision. "You clean up nicely, Mr. Blackburn," she teased as she brushed the last of the trimmed hair from his shoulders. "Is that so?" Ben caught her hand and pulled her around to face him. "And does Miss Palmer approve of the results?" "Most definitely," Rebecca replied, dropping a quick kiss on his upturned face. They set out for town in the early evening, the wagon freshly washed and the horses groomed to a shine. Ben had put down clean straw in the bed of the wagon and added a cushioned seat for Rebecca's comfort. As they traveled, he pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history, clearly trying to distract her from any nervousness about their reception in town. The dance was being held in the town hall, a modest building that served multiple functions for the community of Willow Creek. Lanterns hung from the porch rafters, casting a warm glow over the couples and families arriving for the event. Music spilled from the open windows, fiddles, and a piano playing lively tunes that made Rebecca's feet tap in anticipation. Ben helped her down from the wagon, his touch lingering on her waist. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Rebecca nodded, smoothing her skirts and taking a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." They entered the hall together, Ben's hand resting lightly at the small of her back. The room was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty pumpkins, gourds, and dried corn arranged artfully around the perimeter. Most of the town appeared to be present, from the youngest children to the oldest grandparents. As they crossed the threshold, conversations faltered and heads turned in their direction. Rebecca felt the weight of curious stares, some friendly, others speculative or even hostile. She lifted her chin slightly, refusing to be intimidated. Ben leaned close to her ear. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured. "The loveliest woman in the room by far." His words bolstered her confidence. They moved further into the hall, and gradually conversations resumed around them. A few of Ben's acquaintances nodded in greeting, and the music continued uninterrupted. "Ben Blackburn?" A booming voice cut through the general chatter. A portly man with an impressive mustache approached, hand extended. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight. You usually avoid these gatherings like the plague." Ben shook the offered hand. "Mayor Simmons, good to see you." "I had a special reason to attend this time." He turned to Rebecca. "May I present Miss Rebecca Palmer? Rebecca, this is Mayor Howard Simmons." "Miss Palmer," the mayor said, bowing slightly over her hand. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance. We've heard much about you." "I can imagine," Rebecca replied dryly. The mayor had the grace to look embarrassed. "Well, you know how small towns or news travels fast and not always accurately." He cleared his throat. "In any case, welcome to Willow Creek. I hope you're finding our little community to your liking." "Thank you, Mayor," Rebecca said politely. "The countryside is certainly beautiful." More introductions followed: the schoolteacher, Miss Winters, the blacksmith and his wife, the elderly doctor and his much younger assistant. Some were genuinely welcoming, others merely curious, but none were outright rude. As they circulated through the room, Rebecca caught sight of Walter Crawford standing near the refreshment table, looking uncomfortable in a too-tight suit. He paled visibly when he saw them and quickly turned away. "Should we speak to him?" Rebecca asked Ben quietly. "Only if you wish to," Ben replied. "You owe him nothing." Rebecca considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I don't think I do. The past is behind us." Ben smiled at her, approval warming his eyes. "Dance with me?" he asked as the musicians struck up a waltz. "I'd be delighted," Rebecca replied. Ben led her onto the dance floor, one hand settling at her waist while the other clasped hers. Rebecca had learned to dance in Boston, but it had been years since she'd had the opportunity. Ben, surprisingly, moved with natural grace despite his usual outdoor work. "You dance well," she commented as he guided her through a turn. "My mother insisted all her children learn," Ben explained, "said it was an essential social skill, even out here in the wilderness." "A wise woman," Rebecca said. "She was," Ben agreed, a shadow of old grief crossing his face. "She would have liked you very much." As they danced, Rebecca became aware of whispers and glances following their progress around the floor. Mrs. Hollister, the woman who had been so cruel in the store, stood with a group of similarly aged women, all watching with undisguised interest. "Don't mind them," Ben murmured, noticing the direction of her gaze. "They're just surprised to see the confirmed bachelor of Willow Creek dancing with a beautiful woman." Rebecca laughed softly. "Is that what they call you, the confirmed bachelor?" "Among other things," Ben admitted with a wry smile, "most of which aren't fit for your ears." They completed the waltz and were about to begin another dance when a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A young man burst into the hall, his face flushed with urgency. "Fire!" he shouted. "Fire at the Crawford store!" The room erupted in activity. Men rushed for the door, women gathered children, and the mayor bellowed for order. Ben turned to Rebecca, conflict clear on his face. "Go," she said immediately. "They'll need every able body." Ben squeezed her hand gratefully. "Stay here with the women and children. I'll be back as soon as I can." Rebecca watched him join the stream of men heading for the door, then turned to see how she might help. The schoolteacher, Miss Winters, was organizing the younger children into a corner away from the commotion. Rebecca moved to assist her, gathering stray toddlers and soothing frightened cries. "Thank you," Miss Winters said gratefully as Rebecca shepherded a tearful little girl to the group. "I'm Clara, by the way. We weren't properly introduced earlier." "Rebecca," she replied, smiling at the pretty young woman with kind eyes. "Is there a bucket brigade forming? I could help with that." Clara shook her head. "The men will handle it. Our job is to keep the little ones safe and out of the way." She hesitated. "I've heard a bit about how you came to Willow Creek. I hope people haven't been unkind." Rebecca was surprised by the direct reference. "Some have been, others less so." "It's to be expected, I suppose." "Well, I think it's romantic," Clara declared. "A mail-order bride finding love with a different man than she expected, like something from a novel." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "It's not exactly that is, Ben and I are still getting to know each other." Clara's knowing smile suggested she saw more than Rebecca had intended to reveal. "Of course, but anyone who saw you dancing together could tell there's something special between you." Before Rebecca could respond, a woman hurried into the hall, her face streaked with soot. "The fire's spreading," she announced breathlessly. "They're saying it might reach the boarding house and the millinery." Murmurs of dismay rippled through the room. Rebecca thought of Ben out there in the smoke and flames, and her heart clenched with worry. "They'll get it under control," Clara reassured the anxious faces around them. "Willow Creek has faced fires before." The next hour was tense as occasional reports filtered back to the hall. The fire had indeed spread to the adjacent buildings, including Mrs. Jenkins' boarding house. Every able-bodied man in town was fighting to contain the blaze, but the dry autumn weather made their task more difficult. Finally, near midnight, the door opened and Ben appeared, his face and clothes blackened with soot, his eyes red from smoke. Rebecca rushed to him, relief washing over her. "Are you all right?" she asked, scanning him for injuries. "I'm fine," he assured her, though his voice was hoarse. "The fire's under control now, though Crawford's store is a total loss. The boarding house is damaged but standing." "What caused it?" Mayor Simmons asked, joining them. Ben shook his head. "No one's certain yet. Walter says he was here at the dance, so the store was empty. Could have been a lantern left burning, or perhaps a stove not properly banked." More men began returning to the hall, reuniting with worried families. The dance was clearly over for the night, though no one made moves to leave until they knew the danger had passed completely. "You should clean up," Rebecca told Ben, noting a burn on his forearm. "And that needs attention." Ben looked down at the injury as if noticing it for the first time. "It's nothing serious." "Nevertheless," Rebecca insisted, guiding him to a quiet corner where she could examine the burn more closely. It was indeed minor, but she cleaned it carefully with water from a pitcher on the refreshment table and bound it with her handkerchief. "Thank you," Ben said, watching her work with a tender expression. "Having you here, it matters." The simple statement warmed Rebecca more than any flowery declaration could have. "I'm glad I'm here too," she replied softly. It was nearly dawn by the time they returned to the ranch, both exhausted from the eventful night. Ben insisted on seeing Rebecca to her door, though he was clearly dead on his feet. "Despite the excitement, I enjoyed our evening," he said, standing outside her bedroom. "Seeing you in that green dress dancing with you, it made even the fire worthwhile." Rebecca laughed tiredly. "I'm not sure Walter Crawford would agree." "Probably not," Ben acknowledged with a weary smile. "Get some rest, Rebecca. I have a feeling tomorrow will bring its own challenges." He bent to press a gentle kiss to her forehead, then turned to make his way to his own room. Rebecca watched him go, her heart full of conflicting emotions: concern for his exhaustion, relief that he was safe, and a growing certainty that what she felt for Ben Blackburn was deepening into love. The fire at Crawford's store marked a turning point for Rebecca's acceptance in Willow Creek. In the days that followed, she accompanied Ben into town several times to help with the cleanup and recovery efforts. The community pulled together, as frontier towns often did in times of crisis, and Rebecca found herself working alongside women who had previously eyed her with suspicion. "You're good with a needle," Mrs. Jenkins commented as Rebecca helped repair bedding damaged by smoke in the boarding house. "Quick and neat. I worked as a seamstress in Boston," Rebecca explained, nodding her thread. "It was how I supported myself after my parents died." The older woman nodded approvingly. "A useful skill. My daughters never had the patience for fine work." She hesitated, then added, "You seem to be settling in well at Blackburn's ranch." Rebecca recognized the question beneath the statement. "Yes, I am. Ben has been very kind." Mrs. Jenkins gave her a shrewd look. "Kind, is it that all?" Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "We've become fond of each other." "HMPH," Mrs. Jenkins said, but there was no disapproval in her tone. "About time that man found someone. Been alone too long, if you ask me." Similar conversations occurred with other townswomen as Rebecca worked alongside them. There were still a few like Mrs. Hollister, who maintained a frosty distance, but most seemed to accept her presence with growing warmth. Walter Crawford, who had temporarily moved into the boarding house, went out of his way to avoid Rebecca. When they did cross paths, he was awkward and apologetic, clearly embarrassed by their history. Rebecca neither sought him out nor shunned him, treating him with the same polite distance she would any acquaintance. "He's lucky you're not the type to hold grudges," Ben commented one afternoon as they drove back to the ranch. "After what he put you through, most women would still be furious." Rebecca considered this. "I was angry at first," she admitted, "but now I find I'm almost grateful. If he hadn't rejected me, I wouldn't have found my way to you." Ben's hands tightened on the reins. "Do you mean that?" he asked, his voice unusually serious. "I do," Rebecca said simply. "These past weeks have been challenging in many ways, but also more fulfilling than I could have imagined. I've found purpose here and—" She hesitated, then continued softly, "and happiness I didn't expect." Ben pulled the wagon to a halt on the crest of a hill overlooking the ranch. The afternoon sun bathed the buildings and pastures in golden light, making the scene look like a painting come to life. He turned to face her, his expression more open and vulnerable than Rebecca had ever seen it. "Rebecca," he began, then paused as if gathering his thoughts. "When I offered you a position that day in the store, I told myself I was just being practical, that I needed a housekeeper and you needed employment." He shook his head. "But the truth is, from the moment I saw you standing there, holding your head high despite everything, something inside me recognized you. As if a part of me that had been missing suddenly fell into place." Rebecca's breath caught. "Ben, let me finish," he said gently. "These weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. The house has become a home. The ranch has a purpose beyond just work and profit." He took her hands in his. "I know our arrangement began as employment, but I can't pretend anymore that's all it is to me. I love you, Rebecca Palmer. I think I started falling in love with you that very first day." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I fought against it at first. It seemed too soon, too unlikely, but my heart wouldn't listen to reason." Ben's smile was radiant. "Then may I ask you a question?" At her nod, he continued, "I know you came to Texas expecting to be a bride, not my bride specifically, but a bride nonetheless." He squeezed her hands gently. "Would you consider fulfilling that intention with me, Rebecca Palmer? Will you marry me?" Rebecca felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Ben Blackburn, I will marry you." Ben pulled her into his arms, his kiss filled with all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, the sun was setting over their ranch now in a way it hadn't been before. "When?" Ben asked, his eyes never leaving her face. "When will you marry me?" Rebecca laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "As soon as possible. I didn't travel all this way to have a long engagement." "Next Sunday," Ben suggested eagerly. "The circuit preacher will be in town, or is that too soon?" "Not soon enough," Rebecca replied, and was rewarded with another kiss that made her forget everything but the man in her arms and the future they would build together. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Willow Creek. Ben made a special trip to town to speak with the preacher and arrange for the ceremony to be held at the small church. Rebecca, meanwhile, turned her attention to preparing for their wedding. "You'll need a proper dress," Clara Winters insisted when she visited the ranch to offer her congratulations. "Every bride should have something special to wear on her wedding day." Rebecca hesitated. "I don't know if there's time. The wedding is only a week away." "Nonsense," Clara declared. "Between the two of us and some of the other ladies from town, we can manage it. Mrs. Peterson has some lovely cream-colored silk she's been saving for a special occasion, and I'm certain she'd be honored to contribute it for your wedding gown." True to Clara's word, several of the townswomen arrived at the ranch the next day, bearing fabric, ribbons, and offers of assistance. Rebecca was overwhelmed by their generosity, especially from women who had regarded her with suspicion just weeks earlier. "It's the least we can do, Mrs. Jenkins said gruffly when Rebecca tried to express her gratitude. "Ben Blackburn has helped half the town at one time or another. About time we returned the favor." Even Mrs. Hollister made an appearance, bringing a length of delicate lace for the veil. "It was my mother's," she explained stiffly. "I've no daughters to pass it to." There was no apology for her earlier behavior, but the gift itself seemed to be an olive branch of sorts. The women turned the main room of the house into a sewing circle, working together to create a wedding gown that would have done credit to any Boston bride. Rebecca directed the work, her seamstress skills earning new respect from the townswomen as she transformed the simple design into something elegant and distinctive. Ben, banished from the house during these sewing sessions, took the opportunity to make improvements to their bedroom. With Miguel and Tomaz's help, he built a larger bed frame of solid oak, polished to a warm glow. He ordered a new mattress from the next town over and drove all the way to San Antonio to purchase a matching dresser and vanity table. "I want everything to be perfect for you," he told Rebecca when she protested the expense. "You deserve the best I can provide." The day before the wedding, Ben's sister Charlotte arrived from Austin with her husband and 2 children. Charlotte Blackburn Thornton was several years older than Ben, with the same blue eyes and direct manner, but where Ben was reserved, Charlotte was effusive. "So you're the woman who's finally captured my brother's heart," she said, embracing Rebecca warmly. "I was beginning to think he'd spend his life alone with his cattle and horses." "I'm very fortunate that he happened to be in the mercantile that day," Rebecca replied, immediately liking Ben's forthright sister. Charlotte's eyes twinkled. "Fortune had less to do with it than you might think. Ben wrote to me about you after your first week here. I've never seen him so smitten, even in his letters." Rebecca blushed, pleased by this revelation. "He's been everything kind and honorable since the day we met." "That sounds like my brother," Charlotte agreed. "Too honorable for his own good sometimes." Her expression softened. "But I can see he's found the right woman at last. Welcome to the family, Rebecca." The wedding day dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn Sunday. The small church in Willow Creek was decorated with late-blooming wildflowers and autumn leaves, and every pew was filled with townspeople and nearby ranchers. Ben stood at the altar in a new suit ordered from San Antonio, looking handsome and slightly nervous. Rebecca waited outside with Charlotte, who would stand as her attendant. Her wedding dress was everything she could have hoped for: cream silk with delicate embroidery at the bodice and hem, and Mrs. Hollister's lace forming a veil that floated around her face. "You look beautiful," Charlotte said, adjusting the veil one last time. "Ben won't know what hit him." "I can hardly believe this is happening," Rebecca confessed. 2 months ago, I was traveling to marry a man I'd never met. Now I'm about to marry a different man who has come to mean everything to me." Charlotte squeezed her hand. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. The trick is recognizing the right path when it appears before you." The church door opened and Miguel stepped out, looking distinguished in his best clothes. "It is time, Miss Rebecca," he said with a slight bow. "May I have the honor of escorting you?" Rebecca had asked Miguel to give her away, having no male relatives of her own. The ranch foreman had accepted with dignity and evident pride. The simple ceremony was everything Rebecca had dreamed of. Ben's face when he first saw her walking down the aisle was a memory she knew she would treasure forever, wonder and love, and a kind of awestruck joy that brought tears to her eyes. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ben lifted her veil with trembling hands and kissed her with such tenderness that several of the watching women dabbed at their eyes. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Blackburn, Rebecca felt a sense of completion that had eluded her all her life. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. Everyone from town seemed to have contributed something. Mrs. Jenkins brought her famous apple pies, the blacksmith and his sons provided music for dancing, and even Walter Crawford appeared with a gift of fine china that had survived the fire. "I'm truly sorry for how things began between us," he told Rebecca awkwardly when he presented the gift. "But I can see now that everything worked out as it should have. You and Ben, you belong together." Rebecca accepted both the gift and the apology with grace. "Thank you, Walter. I wish you well in rebuilding your store." As evening fell, the celebration continued under the stars. Ben and Rebecca danced together, then with various guests, but always finding their way back to each other, as if drawn by an invisible thread that would not allow them to be separated for long. "Happy, Mrs. Blackburn?" Ben asked as they swayed together to a slow melody. "Completely," Rebecca assured him, her head resting against his shoulder. "And you, Mr. Blackburn, more than I ever thought possible." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "I keep thinking about that day in the store when that woman said you were unwanted." Rebecca's smile turned wry. "Not my finest moment, but it was," Ben insisted. "Because you stood there with such dignity, such strength, and all I could think was that she was wrong, so wrong. You were wanted by me from that very first moment." Rebecca reached up to touch his face, her heart overflowing with love. "And I will always be grateful that you said so, right there in front of everyone." As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Charlotte approached them with a knowing smile. "I think it's time the bride and groom were allowed to retire," she suggested. "The children and I will see to the last of the guests." Ben and Rebecca exchanged a glance, both suddenly aware of what awaited them. They had maintained propriety throughout their courtship, limited to kisses and embraces that, while increasingly passionate, had never crossed the boundaries of respectability. Tonight, those boundaries would no longer exist. They said their goodnights and slipped away to the house, now quiet and intimate after the day's festivities. Ben led Rebecca upstairs to their bedroom now, not just his, where he had prepared one final surprise. The room was illuminated by candles, and scattered rose petals led to the new bed, turned down and waiting. "Charlotte's touch," Ben admitted with a smile, "though the idea was mine." Rebecca took in the romantic scene, her heart full. "It's beautiful." Ben came to stand behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "I want everything to be perfect for you," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the sensitive spot just below her ear. Rebecca turned in his arms, reaching up to loosen his tie. "It already is perfect," she assured him. "Because I'm with you." What followed was a night of tender discovery, as they learned each other's bodies with the same care and attention they had devoted to learning each other's hearts. Ben was gentle and considerate, mindful of Rebecca's inexperience, yet passionate in his devotion to her pleasure. Rebecca, for her part, set aside any maidenly hesitation, giving herself completely to the man she loved and finding joy in their union that surpassed anything she could have imagined. As they lay entwined in the aftermath, Rebecca's head pillowed on Ben's chest, she felt a sense of homecoming that went beyond the physical. This was where she belonged, with this man in this place. All the twists and turns of her journey, the loss of her parents, the desperate decision to become a mail-order bride, even Walter Crawford's rejection had led her to this perfect moment. "What are you thinking?" Ben asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes life's disappointments are actually blessings in disguise," Rebecca replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. If Jonathan Crawford had lived, if Walter had wanted me, I would never have found you. Ben tightened his arms around her. I like to think we would have found each other somehow, that some things are meant to be regardless of the path. Perhaps, Rebecca agreed, but I'm grateful for the path that brought us together, difficult as it sometimes was. As am I, Ben said softly. Every step of it led you to me, and for that, I will be forever thankful. In the months and years that followed, the Blackburn Ranch prospered under their joint care. Rebecca's influence transformed the house into a true home, warm and welcoming to all who visited. Ben's cattle business expanded, with his breeding program earning recognition throughout Texas. The spring after their wedding brought their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Rebecca's mother. She had Ben's blue eyes and Rebecca's auburn hair, and from her first moments, she had both parents wrapped around her tiny fingers. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, James, who grew to be the image of his father, with the same quiet strength and natural affinity for the land and animals. He followed Ben everywhere from the time he could walk, absorbing his father's knowledge of ranching like a sponge soaks up water. Rebecca found her place in the community as well. Her sewing skills led to a small side business creating special occasion dresses for the women of Willow Creek and surrounding areas. She also taught at the school 1 day a week, sharing her love of literature and history with the local children. 5 years after their wedding, Rebecca stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Ben teach 4-year-old Elizabeth to ride her first pony while 2-year-old James clamored for his turn. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, where their third child grew. The ranch had grown too, now encompassing 500 acres with a reputation for the finest cattle and horses in the territory. Miguel and Tomás remained, joined by several other hands as the operation expanded. Tomás, now a young man of 20, was courting Clara Winters with Ben's blessing and encouragement. Walter Crawford had rebuilt his store, smaller but successful enough, and had recently married a widow from a neighboring town. He and Rebecca had developed a cordial if distant relationship, the awkwardness of their first meeting fading into the past. Mrs. Hollister still sniffed disapprovingly when Rebecca entered a room, but even she had been known to request Rebecca's sewing services for special occasions, a tacit acknowledgement of her place in the community. As Ben lifted Elizabeth down from the pony and swung James up for his promised turn, Rebecca felt a profound sense of contentment wash over her. This was the life she had never known. She wanted the hard work and simple pleasures of ranch life, the love of a good man, the joy of their children, the respect of their community. Ben glanced up, catching her watching them, and his smile still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. He handed the pony's lead to Tomás, who had been helping with the lesson, and walked toward the house. "Everything all right?" he asked as he climbed the porch steps. "You should be resting," Rebecca laughed. "I'm pregnant, not ill, and everything is more than all right." She took his hand and placed it on her belly where their unborn child kicked vigorously. "Someone's eager to join the family." Ben's face softened with wonder as it had with each of their children. "Strong like his mother," he said, "or her father," Rebecca countered with a smile. Ben pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her condition. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Mrs. Blackburn? You might have mentioned it," Rebecca teased, "but I never tire of hearing it." "I love you," Ben said, his voice deep with sincerity, more with each passing day. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold, Rebecca thought back to that fateful day in Crawford's Mercantile. She had stood there humiliated and rejected, believing her dreams of a new life were crumbling before her eyes. Instead, it had been the beginning of a journey more wonderful than anything she could have imagined. She had come to Texas unwanted, or so she'd been told. But in the eyes of the man who held her, in the voices of their children calling from the yard, in the life they had built together, Rebecca Palmer Blackburn had found a truth far greater than she had ever dreamed possible. She was wanted. She was loved. She was home.